Welcome, everyone. I just want Jesprit. Hi, how are you? I know we did this before. I did this workshop in February for the Literacy Volunteers of America, and what it was I have 7 points to discuss, and it was totally interactive. So, like after every point, we can talk about how we implement this in our classrooms. And what I wanted to say is the information is not new. It's sort of just reaffirming what we know already. We have a global society today. Our teaching and our learning is very, very different. I teach for Raritan Valley Community College, and I've had 14 months of Zoom, and we just finished yesterday, actually. And um, I couldn't do all my bells and whistles of my classes that I usually do, but I had to adjust. And what we will find out as we go through these simple 7 points is we have to acknowledge where our students are. Like today is the end of Ramadan. Well, I was teaching a class at 6 o'clock, and my students were very, very hungry at that time. So I had to adjust my teaching so that they could go and eat. And then they came back to me. It was very fluid, it was very easy, but it's just what we have to do today. And, I often think if we were in person, how would that have worked out? But it all worked. But those are things that we have to acknowledge. Um, this is just an open discussion. Jump in whenever you feel like it. And it's what happened at the end of the literacy conference is everybody was talking about how to teach or show empathy, not pity, not sympathy, but how to empathize with what our students are going through. So I thought that was an important point that we should somehow weave into our discussion. And with this whole world that we have now is then the question is we're given a curriculum, maybe we have our textbooks, but what do we really teach, and how do we weave in all the other aspects of the world into our teaching and learning? um, my springboard, my point is I saw this in a horoscope, and the question was, um, your work goes better when you understand the values and challenges of the people you are trying to serve. And I think that's an important springboard point, because I was a high school teacher. I've always taught at the college level. I've been teaching for 44 years, whatever. But I always felt, and I'm sure you do too, how do you get into the student's head? You don't want to know everything about a student, but during the course of a class, you do want to know where they're coming from. I found out that one of my students who I had for 2 semesters was married at 15. And, it's sort of, and she was very determined. She had never finished high school, and now she's at the community college. It really made me more aware of her goals. And sometimes you don't get that, but sometimes you do. And I think we need to know a little bit about the background of our students, or a lot of the background of our students, just so we can move forward, and we're all moving forward together. And, there's this cliche that we've heard for 14 months, we're in it together. Well, with our students, we really are. And I think the consistency with my students was I was on Zoom a half hour before the class started, and then they could get on, and then they could vent. And that was a really good point of starting our class. So, without any further ado, that is where we're coming from. And please feel free to just jump in. They're just very simple points of teaching and learning, strategies of instruction. So the first thing is us. We as teachers, be knowledgeable about the world around you and how the world events impact on the lives of your students. Now, I read newspapers. A lot of my students don't read newspapers. They don't even know what that is. They read on their phone and they get little snippets of the world. So every time I started a class, I would try to do a do now, talk about the Kentucky Derby, um, very cultural, quickie little sayings. But I do think that our students need to know about that. Ramadan was a big teaching learning experience because my students who were going through Ramadan were explaining to other students. And that was a wonderful springboard in itself. I think that we as educators, instructors, tutors, we need to know what's going on in the world. The minute everybody started to get their vaccine, sometimes I couldn't contain the conversation, but they needed to talk about it. And they were all sharing their experiences. One woman could not get out of bed for 3 days. Another guy got a migraine, and we had to talk about what a migraine was. So I think the premise is be knowledgeable about the world, um, and bring that into your classroom, because when you think about what we have to teach our students, and I'm coming from the ESL background, and I know a lot of you are from the literacy background, we have to develop our background information, especially if you're doing literature in a class. One of our classes at Raritan Valley, we teach Saving Private Ryan. And it's an adapted book, but it is a huge book as far as information. And to think about World War II and all of the pieces, sometimes it overshadowed the idea of the fluency of the story. So we have to be aware of what our surroundings are. And my question to you is, how do you mesh that into your classes? How does your knowledge, your background information help your students and go back into the classroom? Does anybody
So,
want to go
so
ahead?
that's not a rhetorical question. That's an
No,
actual
it's a real
question.
question.
So,
It's a real
folks can chime in if you want to in the chat, or raise your digital hand so we can kind of organize it in a fashion, because there's 90 folks here. Uh,
wow.
so then you could that way, then we can unmute in order. But while you're thinking about raising your hand, one of the things I said in the chat, Diana, is that for me, um, at first I didn't think I was going to like my iPad. I was given my iPad as
Yeah.
a gift, and I was like, meh, thank you, but I'm not super excited about it. But I have really found that the news app, I really like the news app, because it generally, again, I don't like the fact that, like, computers read you and create like algorithms about you. But right now I've got stories for me, because it knows what I like, pop up about Mexico, Japan, like Europe, Finland, archaeology, music. And so I get articles from newspapers and magazines from all over the world on all of these different topics. And I find that to be really, really helpful, because just reading one newspaper, even though I do like newspapers, but just reading one newspaper, I feel like doesn't keep me up to date on kind of what's going on.
And another thing to add to that, and please jump in, how do the world events affect our students and their classroom in their teaching and learning time? When the pandemic greatly hit India, my students really were beside themselves and are distracted. And I had to acknowledge that. It's almost like they're going through a crisis, but yet I want them to do present perfect.
Right.
And how do you balance that? how do you make, your work important, but yet consider, what the students are going through? And it's very, very difficult. When I was a high school teacher, I used to tell my students, let's all leave our problems out the door. And then at the end of the class, we would pull them back in. But that's a very hard reasoning aspect of teaching. We still have to acknowledge it, but yet we still are obligated to teach.
Right. I mean, kind of crucial developmental experience for me as a young ESL teacher. I mean, there was a gentleman at the back of the classroom just seemingly zoning out, right? And it was a couple weeks into the class, and he was just sort of like seemingly not with us. And so they were doing small group work or pair work, and so I floated over to him and to check, to see how things were going, and just like sitting down next to him, um, he disclosed to me that he was Cambodian, that he had lost like his entire family in the killing fields to the Khmer Rouge, and sometimes that trauma just came back and took him, and so I was like, all right, so we may be talking about the past perfect progressive,
Yes, yes,
but right now you just need to be with you, and like I'll come back, let me know when you want me to come back, but there's nothing to be gained for me giving you a hard time about this, because I can't even possibly imagine what you
right.
experienced and what you're feeling, and so it wasn't a big thing. It was just sitting down next to him and kind of like what's going on, and that I think was really crucial. So Aggie, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, actually, because Diana brought it up and I thought it was kind of funny. I had this one student, because it was nothing traumatizing like the Khmer Rouge, demolishing your entire family. But it was something that he kind of brought up, and it was kind of a social issue, but it was kind of a lighthearted social issue. He was actually complaining about Donald Trump. And then the other students started complaining about Donald Trump, and then I got the whole class complaining about Donald Trump. And I'm like, Diane, I'm trying to teach past perfect, right?
Yes.
So I said, okay, everybody, Zoom, type in a past perfect sentence about Donald Trump.
That was perfect.
So I'm like, I guess like they're going to Shanghai my class soon. So
Yeah.
And that's what happened with the vaccine. Who was getting the second vaccine, the first vaccine, who had, the repercussions from the vaccine. And you're right. And I live in Hunterdon County, and my students mostly are from Somerset and Hunterdon County. The politics of this area are right up front, and I tried not to bring it into the class. And I would preface it by saying, we're not talking about politics, we're just talking about history. But Aggie, you're absolutely right. The one thing with the Zoom, and not to digress, and then we'll get on to point two, was because I could see everybody's face, I made sure that every single student participated. So I would say, okay, it's Aggie, it's Erica, it's Eric, it's Maria, it's Shona. And I would go around the Zoom screen to make sure. So in a way they couldn't escape. One thing about knowing the knowledge of my students, I had to teach with a woman, and I'm sure this is happening to you, a woman who was in the hospital, who was in jeopardy of her pregnancy. I One other student worked in the back of the restaurant where she worked, and you could see all the plates and you hear all the noise. Another person had to go to Mexico. Another person went to Costa Rica, and they were very, very good because they still were able to work on their phones. So I think our teaching situation is different. And, to be knowledgeable of their world and our world is, I've said to them many times, if you don't bend, you break. And of course, that took a lot of explanation too. Um, but it's been interesting, and I just think more and more we have to know the background of our students. There was something that just disappeared on the chat.
Bernadine was just
Okay.
saying, well, first off, um, Saeed was thanking you for recognizing Ramadan, and Eid
Oh,
Mubarak to the Muslims attending this session. So thanks, Saeed,
yes.
for passing that along. And then Bernadine was saying that they discuss world events to practice conversation using Google News and the World News tab. Sometimes there's good videos to watch and share. So there are these resources out there.
Yeah, and my students were very surprised that I read 3 newspapers a day. And, I'm retired and I teach part-time, but I said to them, even when I was working full-time, 2 jobs, I made it like my homework to read the newspaper and to bring the world into the classroom because I knew my students were not able to do that themselves. I just went away on a short weekend up to New York State, and I kept looking for the New York Times, and it was very, very expensive. And I did buy it because I just didn't want to be out of the loop. So, and you bring that back to your students. And I think they look to us to be knowledgeable about what's going on. You're seasoned teachers that they'll ask you questions that just throw you for a loop, sometimes embarrassing, but it's on their mind. Okay, somebody said, Aniela, you use Easy English News. How does that work?
I just
Okay. Oh,
can
I'm
I
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
uh, can I
Yeah.
Okay.
can I
Um,
say
so Easy English News is hard to see on your phone, but a lot of my students do have iPads and laptops. And so we buy the subscription for our students. It's just a once a year fee, and they all can look at it. I give them the password, and then they all go into it. It's Elizabeth Clare's Easy English News,
Okay.
and it's a monthly newspaper, and it's written on their level or an easier level. I guess maybe you would say fourth grade level. But really, really good. It gives a little bit of everything besides current events. It gives idioms. It gives how to pronounce words. Some doctor will give the phonetic section.
um,
It talked about Ramadan, so everybody got to understand what that was, and then we have a discussion. And then at the last page is a dictionary of all the words that are in the Easy English News that they have actually the definitions of all the words.
Aniela, let me ask you a question, and then I think Dr. Tamizi, you would like to speak. Aniela, we're talking about being knowledgeable ourselves about the world around us and how the world events affect the lives of our students. Do they ever question you about the relevancy of what we're teaching?
Yes, they do. They
And how
want
do
to
you
know,
address that?
why do we need to know
Right.
the present past perfect? They, their hardest thing, and I find, besides knowing the grammar names of the stuff that we're teaching, their hardest thing, besides all of that, is learning how to speak and use do, does,
Right.
don't, doesn't. Of all things, they don't understand why that, what they don't, they want a name for it. And I'll tell them it's helping verb, da, da, da. Because they don't have it in their language. They don't have do, does, don't. That's why they say, I know, go to school,
Right.
because they don't ever say don't in their language. That's
And,
the hardest, but they want to know, where does that come now in the grammar part?
and
What part of grammar?
I'm sorry, Aniela, and also let me jump in. We as the instructors, we have to know that our colleagues, our American colleagues, Native American colleagues, don't use the perfect grammar at all times.
Right.
So, how long have you lived here? When I ask the students what the problem is, when they're up to a grammar level 5 about present perfect, they don't hear it used. And I think we need to know that,
Point that out. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah,
So
I give a overall presentation way at the beginning
Yeah.
of all the verb tenses, so that they can see that there are many of them. Not that we're going to learn these all now, maybe in 5 years we'll have them all. but this is the overall
Right.
view.
All right, so I just want to clarify to everybody that because there's 96 of us,
Oh, wow.
you can't just speak, right?
Okay.
You need to raise your hand so that we can do this in an organized not your analog hand, your digital hand, because I can't see 95 people at the same time. So you need
can
to
we
make sure
talk
you raise
about
your analog hand.
I'm sorry, can we talk to Dr. Tamizi? I think,
Yes, but that's why I'm saying that, because Dr.
Okay.
Tamizi was trying to get a word in edgewise, and I appreciate that. But the only way we can do this in a controlled fashion is if we raise our digital hand, because that way we can see it. So Dr. Tamizi?
A point of cultural literacy. So you mentioned Ramadan. So Ramadan is a month where Muslims received the Quran. Muhammad received the Quran, and the end of Ramadan, that is today, is the Eid, which is almost like Christmas for Muslims.
Wow.
So it's a very big holiday. So
Yes.
the end of Ramadan, that is today, marks the day of Eid. So I thought I'll just bring that. And I use these holidays to teach ESL also. I use all the holidays from all culture and all religions, and also about India and other things for my ESL teachings.
And I agree with you about teaching the holidays. You know, we're here in the United States. We seem to celebrate everything. National Chocolate Day, National Strawberry Day. And a lot of that I brought into the class for a minute, just to sort of make the students laugh. And I said, oh, we Americans, if you look on a calendar, there are all these, not holidays, but celebrations. But it is good to develop the vocabulary and, you know, to give them background about Halloween. And we're not just crazy people knocking on doors for candy. That, you know, is an excellent point. It really is.
Nancy had her hand up. Nancy Nolan. Yep.
Hi, good morning. I use a Voice of America. It has different levels and news articles. I feel it's good, and you can research, so they keep all the articles if you wanted to research, say, why we do Easter egg hunts or something.
Yeah.
Does anybody else use Voice of America or just me?
It sounds like a good one.
I've
used it too.
I've used it too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, we can go on to point 2, if you'd like. This is something for us to ponder. We always ask the students, what do they do in their free time? Here you're weaving the verbs in with conversation or writing. And what do they eat? How can we be sensitive to the fact that their lives are so different from ours and from each other? Do we do the research? When I was teaching high school, my students would come in and we would talk, and what did you have for breakfast? Well, they had a sandwich. Well, I found out right away is on their way to school, they would stop at Quick Check and get a sandwich for breakfast, because really there was no one at home to make them breakfast. A lot of our families are on survival mode. The parents are working 2 or 3 jobs. And again, how do we address that to be really good educators? You know, when your students are falling asleep at 2:00 in the afternoon, besides, you know, with Ramadan, but on a normal day, they're hungry. How are we sensitive to that? How are we empathetic to that? How do we really address that? And I maybe I know some of you teach at night. How is that sensitivity demonstrated in your classrooms? It's not a rhetorical question. It's a real question.
No rhetorical questions here.
Yeah, it's all real.
It's all real questions. I find one of the things that I do teaching online now, and I do teach at night, I teach from 8 to 9:30 at night, is that I'm not, I don't force students to have their cameras on, right? Because sometimes my students are cooking dinner for their
Yeah.
family and do an ESL class at the same time. Sometimes they leave their cameras on so I can see them cutting onions and like listening in. But I'm not like, you know, I don't want to force them to be on camera if other things are going on in their apartment or their house that like make it difficult for them to do so. Yeah, Aggie has her hand up.
Yeah, so at nighttime, I used to teach at Mercer County Community College, but my classes were a little bit different. They're computer science classes. So the kids have to be, or my students, they're not kids, my students have to be in front of a computer.
Mm.
Otherwise, they can't do anything. And I did find the situation where there was a couple of them that were just not doing well. During the pandemic, their families had a lot of financial situations, and they were actually losing internet connectivity
Ooh.
as a result of that. So what I would do is, I'm not suggesting that, you know, everybody does this, but I actually put videos up, and, you know, I would record the lessons and everything. And I would make them available so that they can use their cell phones to watch the video. Because I discovered the hard way since 2017, when I was teaching at a public high school, that the families who are not financially well off, all of their children have cell phones anyways.
Yeah.
So the cell phone is the lowest common denominator, no matter what age group you're teaching. So I relied upon that cell phone heavily for students who had internet access problems. And so everything that I taught is available somehow through a recording. I don't like recording the students too much because it gets into all sorts of violations with FERPA. But, you know, I recorded myself. So they got to watch me for 45 minutes, which probably is something they didn't want to do, but it's better than not attending class.
And Aggie, that's a really good point that you brought up. And I had to learn to be sensitive because I went through a class this semester where the student was an A student and never showed his face, never went on camera. And it was very unnerving to me because, you know, we have these in-services with our supervisors and administrators at the college. And there's such a thing now as Zoom etiquette, which meant you're supposed to be on camera. And again, to be sensitive, I think the student worked on a farm and he was taking care of horses. Maybe he just didn't want to show the surroundings. So I didn't push it, but you know, his work was excellent. He participated. You know, if someone is working in a laundry room, some of the students were doing that. And then the question is, you know, how far do we go as educators? I allowed it, but there was nothing I could do but allow because I know their surroundings may not be, you know, the best. And but they're willing to learn. And that was a really big thing. How do you balance that? Some of my colleagues were getting very angry and you can't get angry. You just can't get angry. I think that's empathy, the sensitivity, the awareness. I think it's major awareness that we're going through now. And it'll be interesting to see what happens in September when we do go back in person.
Yeah. Dr. Tamizi had his hand up.
Yes. I just wanted to say that, you know, even before we start teaching, we have to win the confidence of our students and build relationships with them. So sometimes when I see, you know, some of the students with their kids, initially I thought that was not good, but then I thought, let us turn that into an advantage. So I started talking to them. I said, okay, I wanted to say hello to your kid and I want to see how they are looking. So they felt very good about it. You know, that, okay, the teacher is just not talking English, but he's talking about the family and he's trying to connect with them. So I thought that was a good thing. And I found that the students were very well connected and they felt good about it.
Yeah, and I think if we bend, we're okay. You know, the students were eating online because they just got home from work and they run in and they turn on their computer. You're right. I see thank you. I see Lauren Phillips' hand.
Yeah. Yeah,
Lauren?
Lauren, your hand's up?
Hello. Hi. I think for our program, it's ESL, so we want to be as interactive as possible and hear the
Right.
students actually speak to us and to each other. So we ask them to keep their cameras on, but if they need to turn them off, to tell the teacher first. Because we did have situations where you have you just see their name, there's no video, and they're on mute. So you're trying to ask them a question, you're trying to ask them to unmute themselves, and you don't know if they're even there or not. So it is a little difficult. You're spending time trying to connect with a student who may not be sitting there in front of the computer. So I prefer for them to put their cameras on for that reason.
And do they?
Most of the time they do, yes. And then, but I think like consistently, to ask them, if you want to turn your camera off, just tell me, or if you want to email me privately to explain why.
Yeah, and
At
this
least
is,
for my class, most of them will turn their cameras on.
Right.
Even
Although,
if I see them getting up to do other things, that's okay, because then I know that they're not there, and that I don't ask them to answer a question until they come back.
yeah, although Lauren, you have your camera turned off.
I know I'm in my office, and this camera doesn't have, this computer doesn't have a camera.
yeah, it's as much as we think that our students are tech savvy,
Mhm.
some do have drawbacks. Some are not that tech savvy. Some of them, they get their children to help them. And it's, again, this is what we're dealing with. We are educators, so I think we sort of have to go with the flow on that. And but it will be interesting to see what happens in September. A friend of mine told me that there's a syndrome called FOGO, fear of going out. And I didn't know that. And some of my students said to me they really don't want to go to school in person. They would love to do Zoom even in September. So I don't know what our classes are going to look like in September, because the students actually were comfortable, and maybe sometimes too comfortable, being on Zoom. So that's another question.
Can
Okay.
Nancy Bonner has
Yeah.
her hand up? Maybe last question before we move on to your next point.
Sure.
Oh, you're muted, Nancy, still.
Sorry, here, am I unmuted now?
Oh, you're unmuted, yeah.
Okay, great. I was just gonna piggyback on what Diane said, in that come the fall, some of the classes still will be online. Not all of them will be in the classroom. So I work for Atlantic Cape Community College, and they're finding that students, it's not that they're afraid to come back to class, but for many of them, it's an advantage. They work in the casinos, they work shift work, or they have young children. So we have requests to continue offering these classes. So for some students, it can be seen as much more convenient and a way to balance their family, their work, and their studies. So for me, I still see it as a positive and just a different perspective there.
And there you're building the sensitivity, and the college itself is building a sensitivity. We have learned to teach differently, and the students are learning in a different way. And someone put on the chat that there are now childcare issues too. And we need to definitely acknowledge that. Okay, we can move. If anybody else's hand.
I know, Gordon, I see your hands up. If it's quick, because I think I'm mindful of time.
Okay.
Oh, yes, it's not a question. Just in terms of what Lauren said, it's possible to it is possible to do a chat individually in case the student wants to let you know something confidentially. You mentioned that they emailed it, but depending how the Zoom is set up, that they can send you a chat.
Yeah.
I just want to mention that.
Yep. All right, thanks.
And Nancy, did you want to say something again?
Nope, I think that was just from.
Okay.
moving
All
around.
right, this is a real question. It's a thought-provoking question. You know, by the end of the semester, our students are more relaxed and they let you in. They let you into their background, into their learning style. How can we take what we know by the end of the semester and really work it into the beginning of the semester? How can we just get out of the gate quickly and find out what our students are all about in the beginning? How can we develop that comfort zone instead of waiting 6 weeks? How can we do it the first or second week? You know, that first or second week is awkward. Okay, we give them maybe a survey to fill out, maybe an essay to write, and that's the first week or the second week. How do but how do we get to the end point and transpose it to the beginning? I always say to my colleagues, it clicked. After week 6, it clicked. I'm looking to make it click day 1. And Dr. Termesi said we have to build up the confidence. How else can we do that? Aggie, I think your hand is up.
Yeah, La Casa does a great job with this as a whole. And I've taught in different schools, and I can tell you La Casa does a great job at this. Day 1, you're not even in school yet. What do you want to do for a living? What's your career goal? What's your dream job?
Wow.
Oh, really? Huh.
Yeah, that's day 1. And at day 1, then I jujitsu off that. And the ELA, the first thing is I also do a writing sample just to see where you are in your writing, because they have to pass the HSE. And I said, okay, write me 1 paragraph as to what you want to do. And then I use that as a level gauge as to where they are in their writing.
Well, and go back, you said Casas.
La Casa, no, La Casa de Don Pedro, my employer.
Oh,
Hi,
okay.
Greg.
Yeah. We are all from La Casa.
Yeah.
Oh, great, great.
So
Okay.
Aniela had her hand up.
Yeah, I can't really offer what to do, but I do know my daughter in the corporate world, they do something so they don't waste 6 months getting to know each
Yeah.
other as employees. They learn whether they're employees through some kind of documentation they give their employees before they enter the workforce, forms that they have to fill out. It will tell them whether they're optimists, whether they're pessimists, whether they're what their likes are, their dislikes, all these things, so that if someone doesn't talk, it doesn't mean that they're being snobby. It means that they're a very quiet person. And because a lot of people make judgments on people. I don't know what that's called, but I do know it's done in the corporate world so they don't waste time getting to know each other. And I don't know if we have that in our ESL or GED world here. I don't know if we have something.
And I think being, virtual does hold that back somewhat. It's the whole tactile, visual sensation. Students come in, they sit down. Do they go into the back of the room? Do they go into the front of the room? We've done things differently for 14 months. And for me, it was a learning experience because I didn't know how much the students would discuss on Zoom. And some of them didn't discuss at all. No matter how much you pulled them into the class, they just really didn't want to discuss. And even though I went around in Zoom, the students were very eager to answer a question, but they were not eager to divulge spontaneously. And what I used to say to the students is everything we do in a class, I would like you to take outside and use it. So there is that gap, I think, that we've experienced for the past 14 months. Hope Blecker, I see something. I think we lost.
No, it's okay. So Diana Calvi before that was saying in the chat that they do a kind of a check-in and how are you doing on a
Yeah.
scale of 1 to 10. And so even if a student can't be like, well, I'm feeling a bit melancholy, you understand? Like if they don't have that vocabulary, they can give you a number.
Right.
And what I was adding to that was that I've seen some teachers replace the numbers with images, right? So how are you feeling
Yeah.
today? You know,
Yes.
similar to something that Cynthia was doing yesterday with, you know, the answer to the 4 questions being images rather than numbers or you know, words. But Hope does have her hand up.
Hi, Diana.
Hi, Hope, how are you?
Hi, everybody. I see some colleagues here. It's nice to
Yes.
see everybody. Our program in Bergen County with the adults will be, we were already told, we'll be Zooming for the first semester come September, so that they don't have to worry about using other schools as locations, because some of our classes are held in public schools. So that's how we get space. But what I did want to add is the students on Zoom, the adults, I've had, and I don't want to call them issues, but in the beginning it was, oh, they're there with their child. They're there, you know, making dinner. And that became, how are you doing today? So it was almost as if when they had their videos on, where they were became an icebreaker of, oh, you know, what are you cooking for dinner? How are you? And we had a student, you know, who shared the recipes that they were cooking for Ramadan. And, you know, oh, you know, look at your cute little baby, or there's a dog. So that kind of broke the ice when they had their video on. We did encourage them. We did have many shift workers, and some of them were just so tired. Class was, you know, they were sitting in bed. And we would just said, you know, you have to dress appropriately. That was the adult guideline. You have to dress appropriately. And they understood. They took it very seriously. And I think it's kudos to our adult participants that they take this very seriously. The fact that they log in from work, go on vacation and log in. You know, I had one student, I'm like, please, you're in your car and you are in the driver's seat. This is not good. And, you know, they have, and I had a student log in from doing grocery shopping. So I think that we have a lot of positives to reflect on. Some of the things that frustrate us as the teachers, they don't realize. You know, they don't realize, and they soaked up learning about the news. They were just, you know, how do you know so much? And I'm like, same thing with Diana, like held up a newspaper. And I said, you know, if you don't read the newspaper in English, that's fine. You live in communities, many of them where they can get a newspaper in, you know, their first language. And I said, that's reading. That's how you're learning. And it was like they needed permission to acknowledge that that was literacy and that doing it in their L1 was okay.
And Hope, let me add to what you're saying. You made me think of something a lot. Our students have huge lives, working children, grandparents live with our students. So I always try to say time management, which is a hard thing to do. Our students can't do homework. Yesterday I spent my whole day grading homework that should have been submitted weeks ago, and the final grades were due. And maybe they submitted their homework now because they're not going to class and they have the time to do it. So I think that's another piece of being sensitive, empathetic, knowledgeable about our students is we're always looking at the clock, and actually they don't look at a clock. They all have their digital watches, which was interesting too, to find out. And how do we get that? How do we make them good students too? I mean, we're definitely acknowledging all of the differences in situations, but we also, our goal is to make them good students. And the time management piece for me is I do take a little bit of time to teach them, this is your priority. You're spending a lot of money for this class. And, you know, we all know we loved snow days because it was, I always used to say it's a gift from God that we have a day off, we can catch up. But we did actually have one snow day this past semester. But sometimes I get a little angry on a snow day because we're not sticking to our syllabus. And, everybody is happy about a snow day, but yet you're not getting the full amount for your money. So things like that are all coming into the classroom too. Good.
Laura has your hand up.
Okay, Laura. No,
Conversation. Can you hear me?
Now I can, yep.
Okay, I wanted to circle back to the conversation regarding the difference between being in live and in person and doing the online approach. And I think there are advantages to be had, because initially there was this need to see the students on video, but then it was like, wait a minute, they might be having a bad day. They might have kids running around in the background that would be distracting to everybody else. So, okay, let's let them tune in and be there. Let's make that cool and okay. And then you found early on that they were willing to talk about things they might not have. And I have both ESL and ABE levels.
Mhm.
And so with them, with this idea about talking about things and sharing things, perhaps because they were able to be behind that silhouetted image, they were able to talk more than they would have been had they been in person and share things that they might not have shared before. So that's the advantage almost.
Now I'm going to play the devil's advocate.
Uh-huh.
A lot of our students, let's say at a community college, they're taking ESL to get their skills up to par. We also, and I do have one more question, but just one point. We're also preparing them for the mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
So here we are very sensitive. How then are we preparing them for their psychology professor, their history professor, who may not be as sensitive as we are?
Is that pointed to me? I'm happy to answer it. I think that
No.
You let them know that this, how we are is how we are here.
Yeah.
And you have to be aware that once you go out these proverbial doors,
Yeah.
others will have other expectations. And if you want to fit in, so to speak, if you want to make a success of yourself, you kind of have to go with the flow from time to time. You have to
Yeah.
know, especially if they are adults, they have to know, they should know that you have to adjust to where you are,
Yeah.
that there is a time and a place for everything.
Yeah.
So,
It's
Diana,
letting our little birds fly away.
to circle back to the notion of time management, where we are coming up on the top of the
Okay.
hour. Dr. Tamizi has his hand up, and then after that, maybe you have to think about like moving through some of your other points.
Okay.
Dr. Tamizi?
Is to increase the self-esteem and the confidence of the students also. So
Yeah.
many students have that wrong notion that if they don't know English, they are in some way inferior. So what I try to do is I try to make them speak about their experiences in their country and things which they have done in their country, of which they are proud of. And then I tell them, look, there are many people here in America whose English is good, but they have not done what all you have done, So that way they feel more confident and they feel, yes, English is just a tool and it doesn't make them any inferior to any other group of people.
And Doctor, I want to use what you just said as the last point, Eric, too, that our students all have diverse backgrounds. Some are very educated, others are not. Some have had very interrupted lives. How again, and they all have strengths. So how do we find that out? And how do we as educators move forward in our class? You've got all these students. When I was a high school teacher, you had students who were 15 years old who had a second grade education. You knew you could not give them a baby book or a golden book or anything like that. You had to take them from where they are. I think we're all talking now about adult learners. How do we pull that all together in the classroom? Just what you're saying, that I had architects and doctors and lawyers in my class who are now custodians in a school, which is very commendable, because they're in a pension system and it's a very organized situation. But how do we find out where they're at, and how do we incorporate it, mesh it into our classes? And I'm sure if it's adult basic education and ESL, you see a lot of this. What do you do in your classroom that works? Last real question. Any comments
Or hands. Yes.
or hands?
Or hands.
Any hands? Okay.
Hope. No, Hope
Okay.
has her hand up.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead, Hope. Oh,
We, hit the tip of the iceberg today. I think that having a forum like this is something that could be great for all of us as we're working remotely, because we're not gathering physically with our colleagues, and some of us may feel, distant. I know this is something that doesn't happen on a regular basis. I see Diane and a few other people I work with, and we do try, and Raffaello. But sometimes it's just nice to know that out of our little pocket, there's a greater world where people are going through similar things, and it just makes us, pat ourselves on the back and say, we're all doing the best that we can. And, thank you for opening up this dialogue for us.
And Hope, to dovetail off what you said is, I think we have to be careful in the activities that we pick.
Yes.
I had to teach a grammar class, and there were a lot of activities that were fill in the blank. So you do some of that. What's the difference between present perfect and past? And you fill in the blank. But then I think now the conversation piece of making everything that we do in the classroom relevant has to be a priority also.
Right. And I think making it relevant is on us. Our books, were printed 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Right.
Making it relevant, is something that they depend on us. And that is something that's not in the book.
Right. Right. Okay, Eric.
so
Yeah,
just a whole bunch of ideas that we're scrolling by. So there's like, the
Okay.
parallel chat. So, but I think people are kind of caught up to that. So any last words? We have like say three minutes or so to wrap up all your thinking or things that you want to leave us with.
I'd like to know what we all foresee in the future, with this, and is our teaching and learning going to be different?
Absolutely. How could it not?
Laura?
Nope, I think her mic was still on. So
Oh, okay.
Rebecca has her hand up though.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
I put a question in about, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes. Okay, I put a question in about if anyone has done simultaneous in-person, remote. I'm in a classroom right now because I like looking at the big whiteboard, but I have been trying to practice, even though I've still been teaching remotely, how like turning myself around, how I might try to include the group, because I anticipate there's a good chance I might have a mixed group in the future. So, I foresee that we might offer some students the option remote and some in person. I don't know what will happen. That's, up to the program directors, but I'm sure, I know it's happened in some public school classrooms and it might happen with us. So, that's something that will definitely make us broaden our repertoire.
I have a number of K-12 colleagues that have done it, but I haven't done it myself. Aggie has her hand up.
Yeah, I've been looking at different options just in case also, and I found this great gadget. It's called OWL, the OWL. It looks like a little owl. It's a camera that will zoom onto any person who's talking, and it'll automatically zoom in. And so what happens is in these very expensive public high schools, and also some very upscale private colleges, they've been using the OWL to deliver remote as well as physical learning. So it's the one teacher teaching in one spot, but there's there's remote learners logging in, watching the class, and there's also physical students in the classroom all at the same time. The professors that I spoke to said they found it stressful because it's technically difficult to implement, and they found it to be hard. But they also had IT departments that were very understaffed. For the schools that had well-staffed IT departments, they found it to be a wonderful, day saver. So they don't have to be in two places at the same time.
It's a good point.
Okay. So I've just in the chat, I've just put the link for the PD certificate. So if you do need the PD certificate, please click on that. And then that will be open for like the next, say, 10 minutes or so to collect people's emails and their names. And then I'll send out those PD certificates in the next few days. Diana, I want to thank you for a great first session.
Thank
Not
you.
only did you get interactivity going kind of on the screen, but there was also interactivity in the chat. So I think lots and lots of people are engaged and are leaving with a lot of good ideas. So the workshop number 1 PD, that's the getting the professional development for this workshop. Okay. And I think one of the key takeaways for me is really stressing kind of being clear about our teaching principles.
Yeah.
Right? Because the context is going to change, the technology is going to change, the situation is going to change. There's going to be an OWL, then there's going to be OWL plus, right? There's going to be different things.
Right.
But what are your core beliefs as an educator and as a human being, right? That's going to help you navigate, changing times. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind.
And to take our students from where they are.
Thanks.
And help them progress. I think that's all of us. I mean, to go from not even knowing what Zoom is with our some of the students, to have them become very professional. That was a good thing. Besides learning the content, and to go back to what Dr. Termuzzi said, you're building the confidence and the self-esteem because now they can do it all. Really.